This is question 10 from the 2016 TSA, and in this question we're asked what's the best statement of the flaw in the above argument. So first let's read through the argument and look at what it's saying. First it says that a study's been done that shows that businesses that use social media more have more financial success. And then it spells out exactly how much. It says that the most engaged companies get 18% more revenue and the least engaged get 8% less revenue than the previous year. And they also, in their last sentence, have this statement: since social media is the future of communication, it can be seen that businesses should interact more with social media to maximise their profits. So I split this into two parts, because this is kind of a separate claim that social media is the future of communication. And then at the end, it says, therefore, businesses should do something, they should engage with social media to maximise their profits. So everything else that's been said before are reasons for this conclusion. We know this is a conclusion because of the therefore. And they're just arguing on the basis of all these facts that businesses should engage more with social media. Okay, so where could we possibly find a flaw with this? Well, first it might help to think about exactly what's going on in the argument. Why are they trying to draw this conclusion based on these reasons? And the conclusion is of the form, do something in order to do something else. So they're saying the businesses should engage more with social media in order to increase their profits. And when you have this in order to statement, that you're normally making an assumption or an implication about causation. So what's implied is that engaging with social media is what causes an increase in profit. Because otherwise, if it wasn't a cause, then you couldn't expect that changing how much you engage with social media would change your profit. And in flaw questions, it's often an assumption about causation that's the flaw. So that's something we could look for in this question. In particular, the reasons have only talked about a link between how much you use social media and how much revenue you can expect. But it's not clear just from the reasons that that's a causal link. So this is a potential problem we could look for. So what's implied is that more social media use causes greater revenue. Okay, so the reasons talked about revenue and the conclusion talks about profits, but there's no reason to think that greater revenue won't cause greater profits in this particular case. So we'll ignore the difference between them for now. But the point is that based on the information we have, we only know that these two are associated. We don't know the direction of causation. So it could be, for instance, that companies with greater revenue can invest more in social media, so the revenue causes the greater social media use. Or it could be that there's some common cause, something else that causes both of these. So for instance, an example of that might be if some companies do more tech training for their staff, then those companies might use social media more because they're more familiar with technology, and they might have greater revenue as well, because technology is useful for making profit. So it looks like this argument is making an assumption about causation, and that's a common kind of flaw. So let's look at the options and see if that's represented among them. Okay, so I've copied in the structure of the argument I talked about before, and here are my 5 options. And as you can see, I've already ticked option C, and that's because it expresses exactly what we were just talking about. It says the argument assumes that social media use causes the increase in profits, and that's exactly what we were saying. It's an assumption, and that isn't warranted based on the information, which doesn't talk about causation. Let's just quickly talk about the other options. The first says the argument ignores the fact that some businesses don't use social media. Well, that's not relevant to the argument because it's talking about the difference in the effect of increasing your social media use. So the fact that some businesses don't use social media doesn't affect what happens to the companies that use it more. B says the argument assumes that companies that don't use social media at all will collapse. Well, that's not something the writer can be assuming because they don't talk about collapse at all. D says the argument ignores the fact that businesses can use other types of communication. Well, that's not relevant because this is just about what happens if you use more social media. So what happens if you use other kinds of communication isn't important. And lastly, E says the argument assumes that all companies can achieve 18% revenue growth. Well, that isn't something the writer assumes. They only say you can increase your profits, not that you'll increase them to 18%. So the answer here is definitely C.